Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about a prize that I've only really started following recently, at least properly, but have been really enjoying since. And that is the Goldsmiths Prize. Now this is a prize that talks a lot about and really champions books that are about kind of slightly more experimental ideas that sort of are quite innovative, that challenge ideas, and particularly, sort of fiction that really breaks the mold of what it means to be a novel. And it's been really fun reading the shortlist for this prize, just because these, as you'll sort of see as we go through them, this is quite an eclectic range of books, and they do very different things to what I was expecting. And in many ways, this feels like the future of the novel. Previous winners have included, for example, Lucy Ellmann's Ducks Newburyport, so I'm potentially a little bit biased in wanting to like this prize. But I think from the 6 books I'm going to talk about, I think you'll see just the absolute breadth and range of what fiction can do and what it is now doing. And we had the winner announcement recently, which was Isabel Waidner for Stirling, Karat, Gold. And they are an author who I just think is so interesting. I listened into an online event where the 6 authors read from their books, and Isabel Waidner, they've been shortlisted before for another book, but this book just sounded absolutely fascinating, and to hear Isabel talk about it is to hear how they talk about class and race and sexuality and gender and capitalism and kind of everything, and how all of these identities interlink and sort of kind of have sort of various sort of intelligent things that they kind of play off each other. And Sterling Karat Gold is a really bizarre book in so many ways, but I really enjoyed it. So essentially this book charts a group of characters who are sort of various marginalized and outcast people in society, and it's really quite fascinating. The front cover, I mean, alone should probably tell you how much of a sort of hallucinogenic trip this whole book is. It is bizarre. We largely follow a kind of almost Kafka-like trial, sort of at the heart of it, where these characters are really trying to prepare for kind of seeking justice and all of those sorts of things. And the book just keeps on going down these really weird rabbit holes, and it's brilliant. And there's this whole section, particularly right at the beginning, where we follow a kind of this main character talking about their father, and particularly how their father may or may not have been a closeted gay man, and particularly may or may not have been a closeted gay man who was in some kind of relationship or had some kind of link to Justin Fashanu, the football player in the UK, who was one of the first, if not the first, I think, professional footballers to come out as gay. While still playing, and sort of backstory on that, Justin Fashanu had a horrible time of it. After he came out, he was attacked horribly in the press. He was sort of absolutely sort of dragged through the mud, and I believe took his own life. It was a really tragic time for him, and this is Isabel Waidner bringing that history sort of back into the world, and also at the same time telling this really weird, fantastical trip of a book. It wasn't necessarily my choice for winner of the 6, and I'll talk a little bit more about the others in a moment, but I still think this is a really interesting book that kind of just fizzles. It's really exciting. There's a vibrancy to the language as these characters run around Camden, and at times it's quite dreamlike, at times it's too real and too brutal, and it's a bit of everything. And I did really enjoy it, and I thought there was a lot to take from this. So I totally see why this book won the prize, and congratulations to Isabel Waidner. They have written their socks off with this book. Next up is Check Out 19 by Claire-Louise Bennett. And this is a book that is, again, a really wild ride, and you can sort of see with all 6 of them how they are really pushing fiction. But in this, we have a character who is sort of basically charting her story, this sort of young woman charting her life and charting it through various things, particularly books, particularly kind of cultural moments. And it's written in this really sort of rapid, almost stream of consciousness tone. And I mean, stream of consciousness sometimes gets a bad rep, and this doesn't do it in the kind of Ducks Newburyport one sentence kind of thing. It does it in more of a kind of floating sort of set of links between phrases and words. So she'll sort of say, I'll give you an example. So she might say, for example, that could be very well said if one is assuming that the book is face up. Face up. Yes, face up in the grass. Yes, there in the grass, a book right beside us. Face up. Face up in a field, in the grass beside the big tree. Just one book. Yes. And sort of there's this kind of breathlessness to the tone and pace of this book that I just found really quite enchanting. It draws you in, and you know, it's difficult. It's one of those books that almost seems to want you to sort of speed up and keep speeding up, but you have to sort of almost resist and try and pull back and slow down because there are so many things unfolding, whether it's the character talking about having her first period, or her first crush, or the first time she really remembers reading books and sort of getting something from it. There are lots of these sort of firsts that come up, and it manages to achieve some really interesting things, kind of looking at some of the drudgery of daily life, and kind of finding something kind of quite exciting in the middle of it. So I found this book really, really interesting, and absolutely see why this is on the shortlist. And it's also quite fun recently because I was reading, I don't think I'd heard of this author, unfortunately, before I read this. And I was reading Bluey by, I think that's how you pronounce it, by Maggie Nelson. And Claire-Louise Bennett has a sort of bit on the back, kind of, you know, little kind of little quote sort of saying how much she loves that book, and it was quite fun to see that sort of parallel of these two books, these two authors sort of complementing each other's work and knowing of each other. And yeah, anyway, really great book, and I urge you to check it out. Next up, we have Assembly by Natasha Brown. So this is a book that has had quite a lot of attention in some ways over the year, and for good reason, I think. It's only about 100 pages long, and it largely charts the story of a woman who works in sort of, I believe, finance, and she is on a sort of program where she's meant to be going out to schools and sort of talking to young people about how great it is to be in finance, and how it's a sector where we need diverse voices, and she herself is a black woman. But she, at the same time, is feeling this kind of tension because she's going out and talking about how great it is and how you know, young black people are going to be accepted into this company, and you know, all of these sorts of things. And at the same time, she is facing this real challenge within it. You know, there are sort of racist comments that are made, or she sort of notices that she's being looked over when it comes to promotions, or you know, things like that. And she starts to sort of feel this real tension inside, where what she's actually saying to these young people feels incredibly false. And then as the book goes on, it starts even playing with the idea of what a novel is. There's this whole discussion about what does it mean to be in a novel, you know, who writes them, is this a tired sort of format for telling stories, is there another way? And it's really interesting. It starts exploring this in a really passionate and intriguing way that I was really drawn to. And at one point, for example, it also even sort of breaks down a bit on the page, and it starts looking at etymologies and kind of uses of words. So she sort of has black and white sort of side by side down the page, sort of, you know, sort of split a bit down the middle. And on one side it'll be, you know, things like white, sort of traditionally, at least in sort of the Western world, representing purity and holiness and all that kind of stuff, and black representing sort of moral, like a stain on a moral character, and you know, the kind of the associations we have with those words. And it does so really startlingly alongside this sort of story of her sort of going through a sort of medical issue. And these discussions of language are happening alongside her own sort of personal medical issues and history. And there's a sort of a real link between this sort of growing fear of her own sort of decay, and the sort of decay of society, and the decay of certain feelings and thoughts, and how she feels like she's also being ground down by society. It's really powerfully done, and it's entirely not what I expected of this novel. Actually, it's the case with all of these. They do some really amazing, unexpected things, and so I was really quite blown away by this book. I just absolutely loved it. I wanted to read it all as one sort of heady gulp of a read, because it's 100 pages, and even then some of those pages are sort of, you know, a few words, or it's sort of quite broken up, but it achieves a lot in a really small space, and I just think it's a really brilliant book, and I'm so excited to see what she does next. I feel like Natasha Brown has a really exciting voice, and I'm really keen to see what she does next. Next up is A Shock by Keith Ridgway. So this book, like many of these actually, is set in London. I think there's only one that's not. And this book details this sort of set of characters. And it's weird. I think on the surface, I did not expect to like parts of this book. It's very sort of broken up into essentially sets of short stories almost that sort of connect, and they do connect, but it's sort of almost more the ride that's the exciting bit here. It's really fun to just watch how this transpires. The book is also a hell of a lot queerer than I thought it would be, which was really exciting. So we've got lots of characters in various sort of relationships and things as they sort of navigate their lives in London. A lot of it takes place not far from where I live, which is also quite exciting. But yeah, there are kind of quite a few sex scenes and quite a few explicit moments, again, that I was not expecting. And this book just does some really exciting things. It wasn't always perfect for me. I sometimes found myself a bit lost and didn't really know what was happening. I think that's also what happens when you sort of split a book up into different sort of slices of life, if that's not really a word. Slice up your life. The book itself, I think, does it manages to connect those things. Each individual part is interesting, even if it's hard at first to sort of see how they all connect. And I think I just generally found it a really fun read at times. His sort of playfulness with language is really quite pretty at times, and it just does a lot of really exciting things. So yeah, I think that's another really good one on the list, and one that threw me for a loop. I did not expect most of what was in it. I kind of want to reread it again in like a year's time and sort of see how the dust settles on it a little bit more as well. Next up is Leone Ross with This One Sky Day, which is published in the US as Poppy Show. So I listened to the audio of this, which was really interesting as well because it was read by Leone Ross herself. And she does some really quite interesting things. It's a very big and expansive and imaginative book taking place on this sort of fictionalized island that sort of in the Caribbean that has a lot of quite fantastical, bizarre things going on. And so it's really strange because you'll sort of be settling into the book and things seem fairly normal, and then characters will just sort of have sort of lengthy bits where they talk about eating moths, and that's like a delicacy that they all eat. And I kept on having moments of like, is this a thing, like, is this a thing that people do that I've just not kind of cottoned on to? Like, is this a real thing? I mean, maybe it is, but you know, moths and butterflies are sort of delicacies that people eat, and they seem to give sort of special powers. And there's this whole section that's really quite daring and audacious, and it didn't always work for me, but I really love that Leone Ross went for it with this, where there are various parts of the women, all the women on this island, they basically their genitalia starts falling off and having sort of lives of their own. Which is really quite fantastical. And again, I had a moment listening to this where I was like, did I miss something? That is what's actually happening here, right? But really interesting nonetheless, because Leone Ross really explores this, and there are these moments where when the genitalia are having their own lives, it's really interesting to see how that plays into discussions around gender and sexuality, because some people and particularly sort of discussions around male violence, because some men will then do quite horrible things to these sort of independent genitalia, and or sort of treat women without them as sort of being somehow inferior or whatever. And equally, we also have characters who sort of love and cherish them, and so this sort of whole subplot thing is going on with this that's really quite bizarre. And it's so fascinating because the language of the book is so sumptuous and so rich and beautiful, and then these kind of quite shocking and bizarre and unexpected things happen that really disrupt the idea of what you think this book is going to be about. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, actually. I thought that was a really clever thing that happened here, that you can't really predict where this book is going. It does, and I just thought that was a really exciting part of it all. And last but not least, Little Scratch by Rebecca Watson. And so this is a book that I read kind of quite early towards the beginning of the year, also as an audiobook, also narrated by the author herself, Rebecca Watson. And this book is, I've since seen the physical copy, and it's really interesting because the words on the page are really spread out. And in a sort of a question and answer session during a Goldsmiths Prize shortlist reading, Rebecca Watson spoke about how, when kind of constructing it, she knew obviously it looked a bit off and a bit different to what would normally happen, but that was the only way that made sense for these words to fall. So essentially what we have with Little Scratch is a woman going through a whole day, sort of going through work, kind of coming home from work, kind of seeing friends, all that kind of stuff, within this 24-hour slot, but after she has been assaulted. And this book, as a result, deals with this really sort of visceral, physical feeling in this woman herself, and in her kind of soul almost, of dealing with the aftermath of that, particularly coming into contact with the man who assaulted her, and you know, her trying to hold it all together whilst all this is happening. And what's really clever about the way this book does this is that there is a sort of we've kind of got two almost different narrators. There's a kind of, we basically hear the main character detail almost everything that's happening in her life, moment by moment. So her turning on the kettle and doing this thing, and turning on the microwave and doing this thing. And, you know, we get all these little moments, but at the same time, there's this sort of internal monologue going on of sort of recounting some of the things that happened. And it's incredibly startling and horrible at times. It's a really difficult read, but I think so essential. And this book just does it so cleverly, because there is this overlap sometimes with those two voices that create new ideas or create new words. So it will just I can't remember the exact one, but I'll give an example that kind of suggests what it was about. But you know, she might have one character saying something about over, and at the same time a character might, the other sort of monologue might say something about come, so you suddenly get like overcome, or come over, and so the language starts really meshing and playing these really clever games that reminded me a lot of a book that I adore, which is by Yann Martel, called Self, which again at one point splits the page into in a really clever way. And so I was really blown away by this. I thought it was a really clever book, really great to hear the narration of it as well. Actually, I think it works really well as an audiobook. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I think overall that comes to the end of these sort of 6 shortlisted books. And as you can probably tell, I enjoyed a great number of them. They didn't always work for me, and I think that's the thing with books that are a bit experimental or kind of pushing boundaries in some ways, is it is uncomfortable and it's kind of strange and new, and it plays with you, but at the same time, where it works, some of these books have just been absolutely incredible. And you know, I think Stirling, Karat Gold by Isabel Waidner is a perfectly good winner. I think it's really great to see a book like this, particularly from a smaller press, really get that boost. And Isabel Waidner, in their interview after winning, also said that, you know, that they have to, for a writer like them, telling the kinds of stories that they tell, they almost need prize recognition to get the same sales or the same kind of attention as sort of slightly more traditional books. And so it's great to see them winning. I would have also, I mean, personally, most of the shortlist I'd have been happy to see win. I'd have really loved Assembly or Little Scratch to win personally as well, just because I think both of those books just do so many things that are so exciting and are really great new voices. But again, overall, I just urge you to check out the whole shortlist. They're all brilliant. They're also thought-provoking. And even if they're startling and don't always necessarily work for you, I still think it's worth reading them to kind of experience that kind of surprise and wonder of what a novel can do. So I've been Bob, rambling about a different prize this time. I hope you've enjoyed, and yeah, please do let me know if you've read any of them, or if you intend on reading any of them, or even any other books by the same authors. I've been Bob. Take care. Bye bye.